Joining me now in the studio, two experts with different perspectives on how best to handle this pandemic. Professor Susan Meeke, who set up the first Behavioural Insights Committee that advised the government during the 2009 swine flu crisis, and Professor Anthony Costello from the UCL Institute for Global Health. From 2015 to 2018, he was Director of Maternal and Child Health at the WHO. Good evening to both of you. First of all, as Graham Medley said there, you can't put one lot of people in the north of Scotland and one lot of people in Kent. But what the government said today, it's kind of inevitable that there is going to be a spread. But what they kind of want to do is direct the spread. Is that possible?
Well, they want to flatten the epidemic and, as Graham said, to try and spread it out so that the health service can cope whilst the whole thing is in process.
But how do you protect the vulnerable when that's happening?
Well, that's the big question. Today we heard that Boris Johnson said this is the largest pandemic threat of our generation. He's right. He's got two excellent scientists, Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance, on board, and they're saying that they're being driven by science. But we have to interrogate the science. Yeah. I mean, I'm hearing 4 weeks we have. I've heard other...
On Italy.
But other models suggest, maybe we're only 13 days behind.
And tell me what the difference in figures were, because if it's 14 days, what happened in Italy?
Well, 13 days ago, Italy had the same number of cases as we have reported in the UK today. Today, they have 15,000 cases and 1,500 people in intensive care units.
So that's in the space of 15 days?
In 13 days, actually.
13 days, sorry.
And a paper that came out in The Lancet this afternoon has shown that they've got 2 days before their intensive care units are totally overloaded. And, of course, the epidemic's going to carry on. So that's the bad news. The good news is that we should be copying the countries that have made a difference. And I think we should be particularly looking at China.
So we should be isolating?
Well, yes, we need social distancing, we need isolation.
We need the things we're not having just now.
But we need a national effort.
Right. OK, Professor Susan Meeke, now, we're talking about people trying to make decisions in families. So, for example, on the basis of what's being said just now, if you're in a situation where you're worried about a grandparent, do you go and visit them now or don't you? Because the Prime Minister said nothing about that today, and yet we are talking about social distancing. But clearly there's a huge emotional concern about that.
I think one of the things we have to realise is there's a big variation in the attitudes of the population, from some people who are highly concerned to others who think there's nothing to worry about, business as usual. And if we're going to be successful in shifting the behaviours in the way your last speaker said was absolutely vital to delay the peak of the epidemic and flatten it, then we need the whole population to shift behaviours.
But don't you actually do that by giving signals, and actually, even if it's just totemic, what you do is you say, at this stage, we do have to cancel this massive event. And people go, my God, they're cancelling this massive event.
They are giving signals. So previously, last week, the idea of isolation was just mooted by Chris Whitty as a possibility. So what's happening is the population are being prepared for what's coming down the road. So already people are beginning to change their behaviour.
But if you've got someone like Professor Costello here sitting, tweeting today, every day of delay will kill, close down schools and events now. That's pretty straightforward stuff. That would suggest that we should be considering that.
So if we close down all sporting events and we have it played behind closed doors, what can then happen? Instead of people being thousands of people in the outdoors,
we just don't have them.
Go to pubs.
We just don't have them.
Or what are going to people go instead? They're going to go to pubs and all sit 300 in the warmth where viruses love it.
So let's just ask you this on the basis that we are the United Kingdom. In the Republic of Ireland, next to Northern Ireland, we have schools shutting. Next week in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon has said she'll cancel gatherings. Gatherings should not take place of more than 500 people. We're doing, in England and Wales, something different. And yet, we're outliers in England and Wales.
Can I say something on this? In that any decision that's taken is informed by many different sources of information. Even within science, you've got modelers, you've got clinicians, you've got behavioural and social scientists. All those evidence themselves are quite complex. Somebody has to bring it all together. Nobody's got the right answer, but what we have to do is trust that our Chief Medical Officer and Chief Scientist Officer are making the right decisions for the moment.
So not necessarily as experts, but just as human beings, what differences are you making in your behaviours, Susan?
I am definitely keeping my hands below shoulder level or trying to, not touching face, eyes, nose, mouth. Definitely washing my hands much more than I did. Coming into buildings, I never routinely used to do that. I'm definitely doing that. Carrying tissues in case I need them.
Social distancing, not visiting elderly people, Anthony Costello, is there any change in what you would do and who you would speak to and go and see?
Well, I visit elderly parents and in-laws and I do wash my hands and stuff, but I want to move it away from just this individual approach.
Yeah.
If we're going to do social distancing, we've got to have a national awareness, a campaign, community engagement, getting every district...
Backed by the government.
GPs, workplaces, thinking about how you do it. And you've got to devolve autonomy to regions to think about solutions, because North Scotland is different from North London. And this is what the Chinese did. I mean, they realised they'd messed up in Wuhan and had this catastrophe on their hands. And they locked down Wuhan, but they didn't lock down the rest of the country. They gave a lot of devolved power. And Bruce Eltwood, my colleague from WHO, who spent 2 weeks there, was astonished at the way they got people engaged. They didn't blame Wuhan. They said, we want to help Wuhan. They set up testing units which got it down to 4 hours for a test. It takes 4 days here. They set up, CT scans all over the place, isolation units, screening units, and everyone got food, delivered to their door. This is the kind of mobilisation I'd like to see our government talking about and protecting the poor and their spending power.